everybody to the second Research Network meeting. Thank you so much for joining us in this community of people who are interested in research in this space. Today's topic explores triage and client-centred services, and this session will comprise of some short presentations and there'll be a chance for questions at the end. Before we begin, I'd wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and I make this acknowledgement on behalf of all panellists today. We recognise their abiding connection to this land, its waterways and community. The Office of the Foundation sits on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and it's my privilege, indeed our privilege, to pay respect to their elders and to all the generations of Wurundjeri people who've nurtured this land for over 50,000 years. Look, I'll just begin with a few housekeeping tips, and that is for all people in attendance, your videos are turned off and your audio is muted. However, you can use the chat function, and feel free to say hello now actually, and where you work, give us a shout out. It would be great to say hello and see who's there. So only panellists can be seen and heard in this webinar. Today we'll hear first from Nigel Barmer, who's the Research Director at BLF. So over to you, Nigel.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Can we bring the slides up? Great, perfect. Okay, so I blame the title on being locked down for too long, but I checked with my colleague Hugh MacDonald and he assured me it was sensible because it turns out Horsham's full of rocket-shaped buildings. The problem I'm referring to, though, is the fact that while research tells us a lot, it's limited in its ability to tell us how to tailor, how to triage, how to prioritize finite resources. So I'll go through some of the things it does tell us and then I'll highlight some of the problems. Next slide, please. All right, so many of you have seen this picture or something similar before, but essentially legal problems are like icebergs. So above the water, we have the bit we can see easily, so people going through legal services, through courts, but they're anomalous. So if we only look at that group, you get a fraction of what you need to know to design services. If we want to achieve bottom-up access to justice that responds to people's capabilities, how they see their legal world, we need to look below the surface. So this typically means what we refer to as legal needs surveys, which many of you will be familiar with. Next slide, please. And legal needs surveys are pretty much the standard international method if you want to look at this full iceberg. So they follow a pretty similar structure around the world. We find out about people's experience of a range of problems, what they did about them, what happened with those problems, how they linked to other aspects of their lives. And they've become the way in which the UN measures its access to justice, sustainable development goals. We really love them. We like them so much. We're planning another one. We're doing the questionnaire for it right now as part of our public understanding of law survey. But you can see from the map, they're pretty common the world over. And this map, the color gets filled in every time I redraw it. So next slide, please. What do we know from these surveys? Well, if we try to distill a lot of work into three important lessons which have relevance to these ideas of tailoring, triage, prioritization with clients in mind, you get to three real simple messages. So there's an inequality of experience. Not everyone has equal chances of experiencing legal problems. There's an inequality of access. Not everyone does or is able to do the same thing. And there's an inequality of capability. So not everyone has the same legal knowledge or capability. So I'll just try and unpack that a little bit. Next slide. So inequality of experience. This is the simple idea that, not surprisingly, legal problems are far from randomly distributed across the population. Prevalence is higher amongst a range of disadvantaged groups, and we see problems that are peculiar to particular forms of disadvantage. Problems can also have a different character for disadvantaged groups, so they can become more severe or last for longer. And these groups frequently have fewer resources, capability to avoid or mitigate these problems. We also see problems associated with particular populations. So for example, as people go through different parts of the life cycle or different periods of economic activity. Problem experience also has an additive effect. So this is something both I and Hugh MacDonald have written about quite a lot. So legal problems cause social problems cause legal problems, and both legal and non-legal issues cluster together in some common forms that we see across the world. Next slide, please. Just as a really simple illustration, I'm not sure if you can see the countries on here. I think they're cut off on my screen. Hopefully you can. I can tell you what they are though, because I have something else open here. 1 second. Yeah, so the red bit's Bangladesh, yellow bit's Egypt, purple bit's Rwanda, black is Mali, green's Azerbaijan. And all we're seeing here is the impacts reported from stemming from legal problems. So we're seeing a ton of stress-related ill health, lots of health problems, damage to relationship, loss of employment, etc. So this is reinforcing this idea that problems don't occur in isolation, they're fundamentally linked to other aspects of your life. Next slide, please. There's also an inequality of access. So this is the picture for England and Wales on the left. And essentially not everyone does or is able to do the same thing. And looking at a picture like that, simple pie chart, legal advice can look pretty peripheral to everyday justice. So most people, the majority, are simply handling problems alone or getting informal advice from friends or family. And there's a range of things which influence which of these segments you go into. There's problem type. So some problems, there's greater availability of legal advice. There's cost, whether it's perceived or actual cost. There's problem severity, duration. So the more serious or the longer lasting problems are, the more likely they are to funnel to advice. Then there's also problem characterization. So obvious though it seems, if you don't see your problem as legal, you're unlikely to get legal advice. Seems obvious, but it clearly has implications for how we might design services. And then legal capability also has some impact on which of these segments you end up belonging to. Next, please. Just to keep it international, there's a simple illustration for Japan on the left and Tajikistan on the right. So you can see 4th down on the Japan picture and 5th down on the Tajikistan picture. Lawyers make up a pretty small percentage of problems. So once again, you know, they could look fairly peripheral to everyday justice. Next, please. Yeah, so people don't see the world through legal eyes. The surveys show us there's widespread ignorance of law and available legal services. We see ineffective paths to justice. We also see referral fatigue. So this is the idea that the more often you are referred on, the more likely you are to fall from the system. And this means it's important that people can easily identify appropriate sources of help. Surveys show us that strategies are entrenched. So people who do something like do nothing are likely to do so again. And this is both at an individual and household level. We see sometimes lawyers are pretty thin on the ground. And more generally, across a whole range of jurisdictions, we see that traditional legal services often fail to mirror what behavior, experience, understanding looks like on the ground. Next, please. So finally, inequality of capability. So not everyone has the same knowledge or capability, and the surveys show us the importance of services being appropriate to their users. Where we see mismatches, we see efficiencies for everyone concerned. Specifically on technology, we see IT now bringing new opportunities, so assisting those with mobility problems, reaching further than physical services, but they also bring new forms of marginalization, whether that relates to access, what's sometimes called first digital divide, people's propensity to use these online services, what's referred to the second digital divide, and these can be exacerbated by language issues, complexity of problem, literacy, mental health, chaotic lives, etc. Next, please. And put together, these findings have been pretty influential. So if we're in a jurisdiction like Australia, where we've got a well-established legal infrastructure, they've informed and increased focus on things like targeting and outreach. So acknowledging that not everyone sees the law or can easily access it, an increased focus on joined up services. acknowledging that not everyone just sees the law, and again, problems are fundamentally linked to other aspects of your lives, and an increased focus on appropriateness of service, so acknowledging the law is not the same for everyone and capability varies. And more recently, we've seen a new emphasis on what works and the cost and benefit associated with different interventions. Next, please. So where's the problem here? Well, the problem is, and I'm borrowing from Becky Sandifer in the US here, democratic allocation across the world remains a long way off. So legal expertise is still allocated based on willingness to seek advice, ability to pay, interests and specific of local providers in doing specific kinds of work. So we see socioeconomic inequalities become justice inequalities, geography becoming destiny. We see this in a variety of ways. This is a really simple picture on the right from England and Wales. So we see income and legal aid eligibility along the bottom and percentage using a lawyer on the vertical axis. So you see for problems where people are legal aid eligible, we get about 6% using a lawyer. Then the just ineligible, it drops. So this is what's sometimes referred to as the missing middle. And then we see use of a lawyer go up pretty dramatically with income. So just a very simple example here, but just on the basis of income, this is pretty far from democratic allocation of resources. Next, please. So the question is, can we allocate resources in a different, more democratic way based on reliable information of costs and benefits and who needs what? And this is where we genuinely have a research problem. So we can tell you some helpful stuff, but we don't really know, don't tell no one, but we don't really know when there is legal need or when it's genuinely unmet, because surveys don't have counterfactuals. So we don't know what would have happened if someone didn't get legal advice, for example. We need a different method, a different design. We're also some way from understanding capability and what level or type of help different people need, essentially because capability is pretty hard to pin down. So there's a lot of effort in these areas, but we're some way from liftoff, essentially because it's pretty hard. Next, please. So we provide some information, but not a concise roadmap. So the question is, with the information knowledge we have, how do we achieve bottom-up access to justice and response to needs and capability? How do we choose who to provide services to? How do we decide what services to provide? And how do we tailor services to clients? So what I'm suggesting is that I'm of limited utility here, but there's some presentations to follow which apply some of these ideas in practical settings and give far more insight. So with that, I'll pass back to Claire. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Nigel. That was great. I just wanted to shout out to say that we've now got over 50 people in this session, which is great, and from all over Victoria. So welcome and thanks for joining us. I now would like to introduce Carmen Parsons, who is the Manager of Client Intake and Inclusion at Victoria Legal Aid. Take it away, Carmen.
Thanks, Claire. Hi, everyone. It's really interesting to talk about this topic, which has been close to my heart for well over 10 years. And I would agree with Nigel that it's a really tricky problem to solve. And there are a range of reasons why we haven't quite solved it yet, but I suppose we have made some progress. So I wanted to focus today not in a very detailed way on our triage and sort of client first strategy and the client centric approach that we're trying to move more towards as a service provider and also as I suppose as part of the legal assistance sector. But I'll just focus mostly on our thinking about priority and capability, because that was the piece of work that I did that drew most closely on the legal needs research. And so I want to talk about that, but I've also can take questions later, or I've got a bigger presentation if people are more interested in our triage and you know, our model of actually how we do this in practice in more detail. So next slide, please. So the part of legal aid that I'm involved in is access and equity, and we run the legal help phone and chat service. We also have the community legal education program and my small policy team. So our objectives we've developed are pretty ambitious and broad, and we are trying to think as strategically as we can about how we can work with all of you and others across the system and in other parts, other related systems to improve the way people find and access legal help, because we know very well from all the legal needs research that many people don't get what they need or don't get it at the right time they need it, that we're not as good as we could be at working with each other to identify who needs what most, and of course we have to make really hard decisions all the time because we just don't have enough resources to do it for everyone. So we've tried to just at the same time be ambitious about what we're trying to achieve, because we want to use technology and collaboration and good processes to go as far down that path as we can. So we want people to understand their rights and responsibilities, and we also increasingly want to find a role for people to be involved in the design and delivery and evaluation of our work. We've recently, we've got a report coming out soon about the impact of legal information provided through the Legal Help phone service, and it's good news in the sense that most clients found it valuable, but it's also got some lessons for us there about how we can do more of that tailored work for people with capabilities. So that's one example of where we've got some really good evidence to draw on, but we want to do that more and more. Next slide, please. So this is fundamentally the sort of part of the service that I'm involved in, and during this recent time, of course, we've all been challenged to, the whole system has been under a lot of stress, and the whole community's been under a lot of stress. So we have had to rely as much as we can on online platforms and remote platforms, which our Legal Help service was really well placed to do. So they are still taking as many calls as they were before, pretty much, and even though they've had to reduce hours a little bit to accommodate the changes. So we've also seen a big increase in the chat service. So that's now providing something like 20% of the overall service. That's information only. Obviously, there are capability limits there, but it is interesting as we manage that and get client feedback about that to see that it isn't just all the simple issues. We recently, in fact, opened a family violence chat function. So even things as difficult as that, in some ways, that's a good channel for that, because it's, I guess, a bit more discreet as well. So we're doing some things, but I suppose we do all of this in the context of our work across the sector. And so, for instance, some of the new legal answers information you can see on that screen was developed in collaboration with some of the specialist community legal centres and other experts across the system, because we do get a good hit rate on our website, and we're monitoring that weekly at the moment to see what the topics are and to try to match our service provision to that. But we rely very heavily on the expertise across the system to make sure that that information is as good as it can be. So it's really, really important we keep doing that. Next screen. But as I said, I guess I just want to talk a little bit about what we've been thinking about priority. We've had a priority client framework for many years at a triage approach for, I think, almost 10 years. But I think what we did a couple of years ago, we just wanted to refresh that idea. So I guess I'm still not totally comfortable with the idea of priority, actually. I guess it's, if I was a person in the community, I'm not sure I would love that term to be described in that way, but we kept that as a bit of a, I guess, an organisational way to think about these things. But what we really wanted to get beyond is labelling people. We want to get to the point where people have agency, where we recognise that it's basically about social inequality. And so we kind of grabbing a bunch of people with a bunch of characteristics to then sort of, I suppose, prioritise them for service is one way of putting it, but that's a very organisation-centric way of thinking about it. So really, we want to move beyond that and get to the point where we're going, okay, we exist to, our function in society is to help people with their legal needs to get them met in some way. But we do, and some people do need more help than others, and that can be because of their characteristics, like some of the ones on this group, or it can also be other factors in their lives and the capability. So in terms of priority, though, we had always had a big long list of people that are a priority, and in the end that ends up being everyone. And so it doesn't really help you to go, okay, but if it's a really expensive service or a really serious, difficult situation, who would you prioritise if you really had to? And that's very difficult, of course, but this is a principled approach to try to work that out. So this policy guides our more detailed eligibility criteria which I'm also hoping over time will become more and more transparent, not only to other parts of the legal assistance sector through our Legal Help Online referral tool or through other information sharing, but also inevitably to the actual community. I think we've got to get beyond holding all of this information to ourselves and just find a way to actually communicate it to the community and say, if you have these experiences and these characteristics, you should call us. If you don't, maybe go online, or whatever it is. We want to get to the point where we can be really, really upfront and transparent about these things. Next slide. So the capability factors that are included in the policy, I think I was explaining to Hugh that I think they are the least developed concepts in our practice at the moment. So we haven't quite worked out, like Nigel says, it's really difficult. We know that in some ways those priority considerations are a bit of a proxy for capability. So if you've got those, that life experience of disadvantage and all of those things, then inevitably that affects your capability to address a legal issue or know where to start or to even take on board the information when you receive it. So we understand there's a strong link, but I guess what I was trying to do in the policy was say, but let's not just use that as a proxy. Let's actually think as well about the individual circumstances of particular people. So things like their personal story of mistrust in, of government services, or their own confidence or stress, or where in the state they are, if they're in a particularly remote area, will affect their capability to engage with legal help. So let's think about that as well. And building that into our processes is hard. We're probably doing it most effectively through training and coaching rather than in a kind of system. In our new intake screen that we're developing for legal help, for instance, there's not a box that says what's the capability, but it is an overlay of how we think about things. Next screen. So I mean, we are doing a bunch of things to try to get more sophisticated about how, as one of the entry points to legal services over the phone and the chat and in our regional offices, we can do better to identify people who can benefit from our help as quickly as possible, and through either information or advice or representation. So we do that we want to do that in a very joined up and considered way, but it's a high volume service and there are trade-offs. And so I guess we just continue to take one step forward. We are very lucky to have a digital transformation project at the moment. So the first thing we're doing in that is a legal help intake screen. So that hopefully will continue us on this journey of being more sophisticated about how we find out what are the particular experiences of people who come to us and how we can match them to the right service. But it also might save us a bit of time so that we end up being able to talk to more people eventually, because we know that lots of people are not necessarily getting through. Legal Help Online is the tool that we manage that is a referral and information tool for community legal centres who are not using it. I think most are, but there's a really great, the tool in it that I like the best in a way is not just the referral, but the information emails, because you can just send out those things to people immediately. And if it's not helpful, it always has another place they can go and ring, or they can come back and see you or others if they need more ongoing help. We're doing a bit of work on our website, so that again will hopefully transform into a much more client-centered, interactive, capability and priority kind of focused digital platform. Again, of course, not for everyone. We still have to find lots of ways to reach people and go to them rather than people come to us. But people do, it does have a lot of traffic, and so we need to make it as good as it can be. And we're just doing a lot more work within our own system, I suppose, to try to educate decision makers, like program managers of different parts of the legal aid system, to think more concretely and in a principled way about intake and referral. We're often quite knee-jerk. We just kind of, we come up with a bit of a solution, and we sort of often are still thinking organisation first and not client first. I mean, just in a sort of a basic level, I think all of us are still coming to terms with what would it mean if we were to think of doing things the way people want them or the way people experience them, as opposed to the way our system has just developed over years. So, for instance, we're set up by legal matter type, and we talk about legal matters all the time. That doesn't really mean much to people. People just have issues in their lives, and they have a range of issues. So that's a structural challenge for us as a system, but we're starting to get greater insight into that, I think. So I think that's probably it from me. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Carmen. That was fantastic and so very informative, showing the complexity of these kinds of things. But now I would also like to mention actually that we are recording this session and planning to share it afterwards so that you'll be able to go back and revisit some of these ideas. And I'd now like to introduce Amy Schwabel, who's the Associate Director of Sector Engagement and Service Design at Victoria Legal Aid. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Claire. And thanks to the Victoria Law Foundation for organising today's webinar. My presentation will kind of work through a couple of examples of priority clients that kind of come and set up the framework at VLA that VLA uses, and thinks through how we're trying to do this work in recognition of the challenges that Nigel has articulated in his presentation and where we see opportunities for improvement. Next slide. Hang in there with me, because this doesn't seem like an obvious slide to start a presentation on legal assistance service design work, but for those of you that subscribe to the New Yorker, you'll understand what I'm about to say. While reading each edition is meant to be a joy, a subscription is also terribly anxiety-provoking. Every Friday, a new edition arrives in my letterbox, and the pile on the coffee table grows. It proved fortuitous, though, when I sat down to read an edition from about 5 weeks ago this past weekend, as I was equally turning my mind to this presentation. While the article was focused on a different sector, health, and a different country, the US, and a different context, the COVID-19 crisis, it made me reflect on how we've all watched the daily reports of the COVID-19 data, number of tests conducted, number of positive tests, clustering of cases, age, and other demographic data, and so on. This is administrative data that is needing to be understood and analysed, but is also being looked at alongside a range of other data sets, including economic data, to make good public health decisions. And so the health sector, like the legal assistance sector, is also grappling with how service data, alongside other increasingly available other data, can help to make better policy and service design decisions. The primary purpose of service data traditionally is to quit use of funds, and that's been the experience of VLA and CLCs alike. But increasingly we want and need to use this data for other purposes. And that prompts questions about how we make it fit for purpose, recognising that there are multiple purposes now. It also prompts questions about what we want data to help us with, including a better understanding of the outcomes of legal assistance for our clients. And finally, it prompts us to think about the governance necessary to share data safely, to collaborate in service planning, and to collectively improve the evidence base so that findings and effective ways of working can be scaled up. Next slide. The Legal Aid Act, back from 1978, kind of requires us to grapple with this challenge of design, planning, and providing effective services that are responsive to client needs while working within a resource-constrained environment, a reality that we have to grapple with. Next slide. So today I want to share with you a couple of examples of how we've used data at VLA to improve our understanding of the needs of priority clients. VLA client profile research, most recently for the period 2006 to 2016, helps us understand that a person will more likely require assistance from VLA on multiple occasions if we first meet that person when they are young. And this prompts us to think further about how our interventions at that early stage can reduce the likelihood of the young person requiring assistance in the future. But what does that look like in practice? VLA's care not custody work is an example. And this work actually didn't start with the data. Rather, it started with a network of lawyers delivering child protection and youth crime services in VLA's regional offices. They were observing a common client experience, a young person placed in out-of-home care, then coming into contact with police when there was no or very limited contact previously. The analysis of the service data followed, and VLA was uniquely placed to do this work. We had a common client ID number for both our child protection and youth crime clients. The client stories alongside the data told a powerful story of the need to reduce the criminalisation of young people's behaviour when placed in residential care. For me, this was integral to the effectiveness of this work. It looked at the service data alongside the qualitative to better understand the problem we were trying to grapple with. In our experience, there's also a role for larger administrative data sets to help confirm the frequency of a problem that we think clients are experiencing in order to help us design a fit-for-purpose solution. In family law in recent years, there's been much discussion of clients that cut across the family law, family violence, or child protection jurisdictions. As a result, they are navigating Commonwealth and state legal frameworks and different courts. One might jump to constitutional reform to establish a single court. But as we know, constitutional reform in this country has low likelihood of success. Analysis of the service data helped us to better understand how common the clustering of legal problems was for clients and the types of clusters to inform the development of policy solutions and service changes. For example, clients most frequently sought assistance for family violence and family law legal problems. So what changes could be introduced to provide earlier family law advice for family violence clients and support continuity of assistance? But also importantly, how could we work to improve the courts and other agencies in the justice sector so that we're working together and that the onus for navigating the system shifted from the individual onto the system? Both examples also illustrate the importance of taking this systems approach to improve the experience of clients in recognition that legal assistance providers are just one actor in the system that we work. This work relied primarily on VLA data. So a limitation in administrative data is that it starts with those who have been able to access a service. Interrogation can identify who is not represented in the data, but perhaps cannot help us understand why. Next slide, please. In recent years, VLA has further built its capability to take a client-centred approach to collaborative service design. We're currently wrapping up a collaborative planning project with VLA's Family Law Program and Women's Legal Service Victoria. At the centre of this work is a legal needs analysis that paints a comprehensive picture and a common understanding of the problem to inform and prioritise service design planning. A strength of the analysis is that it looks at service delivery data, VLA, private practitioners, CLCs. It looks at service provider information, where they're based, how far they travel to provide a service. It looks at the legal need data and LAS indicators, crime statistics agency data, including family violence data, a range of ABS data sets, practitioner surveys, and data modelling. In doing so, it illustrates that we cannot rely on a single data source or come to a single figure to understand the unmet legal need problem. Next slide, please. The complexity of this work requires us to turn our mind to the communication piece that needs to sit alongside the findings to explain why there is no single truth to audiences that might want simple and easy answers. It also highlights the need to resource this work adequately if we are to build capability and capacity to undertake client-centred design informed by a sound evidence base. And while this work will be foundational for future service planning and family law, it is resource intensive. It is important that we continue to invest in these projects to better understand priority geographic locations, priority cohorts, priority legal problems, and combinations of the three. And a more detailed legal need analysis we undertook for Mildura more recently is an example of this. But it also highlights the need for scalability of this work, and ideally an ability to more readily replicate some of the analysis to understand the impact of interventions. The data discovery tool that we've designed and are building is part of this strategy. While there will still be a benefit in engaging in more intensive collaborative planning processes, and this is envisaged under the NLAP, soon to be finalised, it is designed to bring data together and help the user further down the path of analysis without the assistance or necessary service design support, or perhaps with more discrete assistance. With the necessary governance in place, the data will also update regularly, and additional data sets that help us understand legal need could be included in future iterations. Finally, each of these projects have highlighted that once you start to use the administrative data in this way, you better understand its limitations. It is essential that limitations are articulated clearly and implications for analysis explained. In a project we are currently working on, we have captured our findings on the limitations of the data encountered when undertaking the analysis. This will inform a feedback loop to support improved data collection and recording in an effort to continuously improve the data. So that each time we do this work, we're contributing to the improvements that address some of the limitations, and we get better at it each time. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you, Amy. That was fantastic. Now we pass over to Donna Askew from the Eastern Community Legal Centre. Originally, Holly Plisker was also going to present, but unfortunately she can't make it today. So Donna, it's over to you, the Director of Partnerships and Community Development at the Eastern Community Legal Centre. Thanks.
Thanks, Claire, and thanks to the Victoria Law Foundation for having us, and to our friends at Legal Aid who've presented before us. Yeah, listening to everyone, we are all on quite the journey, and you know, there's so much work to be done, both in the research and in the implementation space. And I think I just want to acknowledge that all of this work must be informed by the voices of those with the lived experience of trying to access justice systems. And I think that's an important thing to bear in mind as part of our person-centred approach. I'm just going to give a very broad, similar to what Carmen said, a very broad overview of some of the things we've been doing at Eastern Community Legal Centre to become a more person-centred practice. But it won't be a deep dive by any stretch, so I can absolutely provide more information whenever someone would like. So, all right, well, next slide, sorry, I've just got to get in the habit of not being able to have control of the slide. Just briefly, ECLC is a multidisciplinary community legal centre. We've been around for 45 years. We stretch from Hawthorn to Hillsville in Melbourne's east on beautiful Wurundjeri country. Yeah, we have a focus on working in partnership and collaboratively with other service providers. All right, next slide, thank you. Now, I've just popped this slide up here, and I also take Carmen's point around, I haven't quite got the best language yet for priority community, but essentially this slide talks about who are the communities who, based on their identified needs, and as we've talked about, the research tells us there are certain communities who are more likely to confront barriers in accessing legal help and managing their legal problems than others. So, and they're identified there. And you can also see, this is our new strategic plan, actually, freshly minted, after a lot of collaboration and consultation, that we have person-centred practice as a key strategic pillar, as you can see there, together with making service pathways easier, which is all about client triage and intake. So we've placed that front and centre as something that we have focused on for the next few years. Next slide, thank you. So why the Enhanced Entry project? Well, there's a number of reasons, and I'll just quickly go over them. So in a dynamic funding environment, there was a need for a systematic approach to better target services to those most in need, and Carmen has spoken about that, as has Nigel on the research. But also, you know, the Access to Justice Review also highlighted that there appeared to be more scope for CLCs to better target their services. This was then picked up in our earliest, in ECLC's earlier strategic plan there, and you can see there that it was identified that an approach that recognises different levels of need and tailoring services accordingly can be a better and a more efficient use of resource. And you can, sorry, I don't know why that slide's come up like that, but anyway, sorry about that. When I printed it, it looked a bit different. That ECLC would have a strategy that focused on developing and embedding a triage framework which supports the capacity of clients with less complex needs to self-manage, and then provide more support to those who may need additional help and those with obviously more complex needs and legal issues. Around this time as well, so we're talking around 2015, 2016, was the emergence of much more person-centred approaches, utilising integrated practice models and including health justice partnerships, which really aimed at focusing people and focused on people, placing them at the centre of service delivery and design, and wrapping support around and seeing people not just as their legal issue, but understanding that, as everyone has said, legal issues cluster and are connected and interwoven with health and other social issues. Finally, and everyone else has spoken about this too, and at much more length than I will, that ECLC as a centre back at this point in time was very much beginning on its monitoring and evaluation of its impact. We were just beginning on this journey and really trying to understand what our data and what our data systems should be, and how were we measuring our impact, and what did we need to do that. So we were also, as part of this work, trying to embed systems that could help us better understand people's experience. We'd also looked, I should also mention, at the legal aid help model back as it was, the legal help model back as it was when it was around this time as well, which really helped to inform the development of our work. All right, next slide, please. So the project was very generously funded by a CLC Innovation and Transformation grant, with the overarching aim of the project to increase access to legal assistance services for people in communities experiencing disadvantage, marginalisation, and those with complex needs. The project really had three key deliverables. So the first one was to implement and review a centre-wide triage framework, which would guide the centre in managing client expectations, building client capacity, and targeting services to those most in need. And to develop and pilot an enhanced intake and supported case management service, which includes engaging an enhanced entry coordinator. So that's someone with a social work background to work with our frontline service delivery team to support those with complex needs, and provide extended intake and assistance prior to and in conjunction with working with the lawyer. All right, next slide. Now, we did a little test of this slide earlier on, so we're not going to play it, but this is just a cute little animation, which is actually just to try and explain the rationale to the project a little bit more. But essentially, it's the three project objectives were develop the triage framework, provide supported case management, including an enhanced entry coordinator, and then develop an evaluation and an evaluation culture. Thanks, next slide. The triage framework is quite extensive. It's made up of 4 documents, which are designed to be read together and operate jointly. And they are the triage and assessment intake and referral policy, advice and casework guidelines. It included our strategic plan and our enhanced entry support guidelines, which were the guidelines that helped our enhanced entry coordinator do their work. But I guess any triage framework is much better understood in operation. And this little Vimeo, again, when we tested it, it didn't quite work on Zoom, but I'd really encourage you, if you are looking at implementing something like this in practice in your CLC or other service that has a CLC connected to it, this little video here is taken from the perspective of someone trying to access a community legal centre, and shows the unintended barriers that intake procedures can create. And then the second role play is showing what an application of a triage framework looks like and how it is applied to the same client scenario using different questions as guided by the framework, which can lead to very, very different outcomes in access to services. But yeah, I'd recommend people have a look. This is still very much a work in progress, and it's slightly different and evolved from this video, but it absolutely does give the indication of how it works. All right, next slide, thank you. So the triage framework firstly assists our AIR team, so our assessment, intake and referral team, our frontline community engagement team, to identify and ask questions. And if anyone's interested in what those questions are and how we ask them, and our intake form essentially that was developed, we're very happy to share that too, but I haven't put that up here. To identify people from our priority communities and understand what their needs are. And then Carmen's also spoke about this a little bit earlier on, different factors that may affect people's ability to engage with legal help, and there's some of the considerations that we would look for. But again, very much asking people around what's happening in their lives, not to actually, and we will then narrow down what their legal issue is, but very much asking what's happening in people's lives, opening up the conversation. All right. Next slide, thank you. So secondly, the triage framework provides a guide on the appropriate service pathway for a person once their needs have been identified. And so depending on a person's identified background, what's happening for them, their capability to self-manage, or if there's safety concerns, so then service provision is determined. So I'm about to show you a flowchart which Holly was going to speak about, and Holly was our senior intake worker both prior to and now with the framework. And she would have provided much greater insight, so I apologise, but I will do a very brief run through of the framework and how it tends to work in practice. But I will say, once we established and embedded this was very much the beginning in our generalist practice of understanding what a person-centred approach at a service entry point would be, with the focus on understanding understanding what was occurring in someone's life, rather than just getting their name, their legal issue and their suburb. Next slide. So you can see there on the left, people can come to us, they can self-refer, or obviously oftentimes through an agency or worker. All calls are then popped into reception, and from there if someone identifies they might like advice or some help of some sort, not necessarily legal, but often they will identify it is legal help that they need, they'll then be referred to our AIR team, where a triage and intake assessment is done based on the framework that I've just mentioned. And that can take, around up to sort of 15 minutes, depending on what's happening for the person. We do a conflict check, obviously, but then if we understand then, okay, so what's happening for that person? Are they from a priority background? What are their needs? So if someone, and if we look at the top orange box there, and again, I absolutely agree with Carmen's words, we haven't quite got a better way of describing this yet, but absolutely, this is a refinement point that I would love to see, which is if someone isn't from a priority background, doesn't have particularly complex needs, and is able to self-manage quite well, they will be referred out, and probably often to a private lawyer usually, but depends on what the area of law is. And generally, if it's not an area of law, we can do either, but be referred out. But if someone is from our priority communities, but have a little bit more capacity and capability to self-manage, but just need a little bit of help, they will be referred to our volunteer night service lawyer or our volunteer day service lawyer. And then in the green box, which is a priority community with complex needs, we will, if it's someone who we've identified who does need additional support to be able to access the legal system and needs probably a little bit more help than the other two examples there, they'll be booked in for an appointment with our day service staff lawyer. Or the other option is if you look down and follow the arrow which says referral to ECLC specialist program, if we have someone who has particularly complex needs and it's in an area of law, so for example family violence or elder abuse, we actually have integrated practice programs which are designed to wrap support around, which have lawyers, social workers and financial counsellors, so they will then be referred there. But if someone is presenting, has got lots of barriers to being able to even commence working or to even receive legal help, our Enhanced Entry Coordinator is someone from a social work background, and you can see their referral to Enhanced Entry Coordinator. They will either work with the person independently or alongside the lawyer, ECLC lawyer, to provide that support for the person. All right, I'm sure Holly would have done a far better job than that and probably has lots more to say, but that's probably it from me on that pathway, and we can talk more if people are interested. Next slide. These were the questions for Holly, so I'm sorry we won't be running through these today. So next slide. There has been multiple learnings for the sector. We have had an independent evaluation report done. These are the things that we identified both from the evaluation report and over time that we would recommend and continue to work on to this day. So working with people and providing support to those with complex needs who are often experiencing lots of trauma and chaotic lives. We need our staff to be able to work with them really, really supportively, but we have had and we continue to provide more support to our staff teams to be able to do that work. So reflective practice sessions, professional development to understand a little bit more about what's happening for our communities and our clients. And the next one will come as no surprise to anyone. For those that are working in integrated practices or health justice partnerships, there's a range of issues that come up when you're working in an integrated way. You can see there from where to store documents electronically, how to describe your work, to issues of privilege and its extent to managing professional obligations. So that also came up as part of putting a social worker and working with a social worker in our generalist practice. We would also say, and this was also in the evaluation report, that targeting services through an enhanced entry system requires a significant increase in resource. It really, really did. And to enable services to fully respond to the complexity, because when you're opening up the questions, you're asking people to tell you about what's happening for them. You obviously get a bigger picture of understanding what people's needs are. And that means you need to provide more resource to be able to respond to that. Yes, and as I've said before, responding to people and seeing them as a whole person, people's identities are intersectional, and trying to wedge people into priority boxes just doesn't fit. So understanding what people's needs are requires a lot of support. It provides lots and deep support to do that work. All right, next slide. This one in particular is a really practical example of what we found in our evaluation of the work. And again, we're now in 2020, but some of these things I can't believe that we even used to do. But it was very obvious once our enhanced entry coordinator and some of our client feedback showed us this. So entry to service is often hampered by inflexible organisation or flexible, rigid rules that often actually work to disempower people. So I think I've mentioned before, our enhanced entry coordinator was shocked when she discovered that we asked people what their suburb was and what their legal issue was. This really shut down the conversation. You weren't able to gauge a sense of what was happening for people. It also placed the onus on the person or the help seeker to be able to self-identify what their need was, and others have spoken about this. That actually is the obligation of us as service providers to support that, not placing it on the person who's trying to help seek. But certainly we did have that in there. We also know, and everyone's spoken about, how legal issues cluster with health issues, and the need to shift our focus to us being responsible for untangling what the issues were. So asking and adapting our questions in a way that help people to take the onus off of them and help people just to talk about what was happening. And the other thing, and you can see there's a comment from our managing lawyer there, which I've put up there. We had this rather, I don't even know where it came from. I think someone else talked earlier on about, just some things that have been around for a long time in organisations. We had a kind of a 3 strikes and you're out policy. And again, our enhanced entry coordinator was shocked by that. And she said, so, Donna, they're the very people that we need to be working with. You should be reaching out to people who don't show up or who, continually make appointments and are able to make them, unable to make them. So they're the people you should be following up and you should be seeking to provide service to. So again, all of this pointed to us, needing to take a holistic view, a person-centred approach, rather than simply focusing on the legal issue. And I think one of the things that we think, though we haven't got the research there to support it, and people have talked about, people reaching out at a time when they can and are able, and we're hoping that this approach, though again we haven't got the research yet to support it, that this approach really is able to respond to people at the time that they're help seeking and able to reach for help. So we would like to think that we are better at doing that, but again I can't say that we are because I haven't got the research. Next slide. Again, just here, I've just listed the successes and challenges, but I've just highlighted the main ones we've talked about. And that the majority of clients were satisfied by our service, and that policy and practice barriers were challenged, and we were better able to target services. And I did run the stats, and I am a bit nervous about the stats, so I don't like to speak there. I think they're right, but when I look at 2017 to 2019, so in the few years once we were embedding this process a little bit more, there looked to be almost 2,000 more instances of information that was provided as opposed to 2017. So to me, that tells me that we are asking more questions and providing more information about support to people when they're calling through. So again, I'm a little bit nervous about that, and I have to double check that. It was done in preparation, but it's definitely showing, even if it's not that high, that we are actually providing more support and information to people at that entry point. All right, nearly done from me. Next slide.
I'll just say you've probably got, we're a bit over now, Donna, but
okay.
I'll do another minute.
That's it. This is my last slide. So this is what's next. Just briefly, we'll continue to build on the recommendations of the report. We've increased FTE and engaged a manager of client services to really focus on this. And we're continuing to refine our triage and intake process. We are looking at new contact centre software called Perios to help inform our data collection and reporting, but also support our AIR team. We're seeking to employ a community service worker again, and possibly look at peer support work in the future, or lived experience worker. And I've just put a link there to a project which is building on the supported case management element of the work, working with people who have complex needs, experiencing mental illness and alcohol and other drug addiction. So that's it from me.
Thanks, Donna. That was marvellous. Thank you. Very informative presentation. Look, we'll go to questions now, and thank you for everyone. There's a number of questions that have popped up here. Just as I'm about to go to them, my chat's disappeared. Hang on, it's back again. And going to the first question, as a first one for Donna, this is from Nigel. How do you assess capability to self-manage, and how accurate do you think those assessments are?
Really good question. I don't know. I don't know if it's accurate. I'm not sure. As I said earlier, we have a range of questions that we take into account. It is really loosely informed by what our enhanced entry coordinator, our social work or advocacy team are telling us, also what our client feedback is telling us. But I absolutely think that is the point, and I think Carmen brought that up as well, that is where we need to understand what capability looks like, and how we should be doing that better, and how we can be doing that better. And I absolutely would welcome an opportunity to do that more extensively across, a number, like with legal aid, or because I'm not sure that I think we could do that better, and I think there's much more room for improvement.
Okay. Did any of the other panelists want to jump in and add to that? Or? Okay, good. All right, now we'll go to a question from Mel Rigel from the Foundation. How have organisations built a culture and internal capacity to collect and analyse data that informs service delivery? And this one's for all the panelists. Anyone like to jump in? Anyone from Victoria like to have a go at it?
Yeah, Claire, I can start with a reflection. I think quite often the people that are collecting and entering the data are not involved as much in the work around doing the service planning, design and thinking. So there's a question for us in the teams doing the design and planning work around how we engage with our colleagues that are grappling with data collection and data entry challenges, and how they understand how that data then gets used kind of at this process that seems quite removed to their day-to-day work, and that they are actually integral to us being able to do our jobs well, and that we value the work that they do in this kind of piece of work that we're all committed to. I mean, I think the other thing is that the feedback loops, I think, are important, because it's actually once you start looking at the data and you go, hang on, that doesn't sound about right, or that doesn't really match with our practice experience, and what's going on there, that perhaps then prompts conversations around how data is being recorded or collected and opportunities to improve. So they're two things that we've been thinking about, but I'm sure other panelists have other reflections.
All right, here's another question to all panelists again. If this is from Jenny, if you need to refer people out to a private firm, do you assess the firms to which you refer in terms of cost, client centricity and so on? And how do you think the private profession could mesh more effectively with the community legal sector? Would you like to take that, Carmen?
I've had those initial discussions with Jenny. I think it's a really, really good question, and particularly for the missing middle, because I suppose our broad practice, legal aid's practice, has always been to refer to private profession through the Law Institute, which does, give some indication of what kind of services they're going to provide, but I don't think it gives a really high level indication to the client about what the potential cost is and that kind of thing. So it's a difficult issue because we need a kind of a simple way to be able to refer thousands of people every year. But the missing middle thing is a real concern. So yeah, so I don't think there would be a comfortability on the part of a big organisation like Legal Aid to sort of do that assessment on a case-by-case basis. Yeah.
I think the other thing there is that VLA relies heavily on the private profession to be able to do the work, and the mixed model is integral to the success of legal assistance in Victoria. And so the panels model that VLA oversees has practice standards that panel practitioners must comply with or meet to be able to deliver legally aided services. And that kind of is the kind of the requirements end of the spectrum, but I think there's a separate conversation and supporting conversation around how do you bring the profession along in the work that we're doing with our clients. And so work around culturally safe services for Aboriginal clients is an example of that. And as we're looking inwards at our own profession, our own staff, CLCs are supporting their lawyers to do that work. How do we also engage private professionals in accessing training, resources, communities of practice that help them improve continuously the quality of the services that they're delivering to our clients? Yeah.
Thank you. Here's another question. This is a question raised by Susie Farrell, and she says it would be very interesting to explore the issues around the referral roundabout as people move between services, particularly as they are not priority. I guess that could also feed into the private profession as opposed to the community legal sector. Donna, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I also think that we need to pick up on the capability question as well, because I think that we need to know that we're doing that right in order to know that we're actually making the right referrals out. And I think there's more room for refinement there, because those people that then end up on that referral roundabout may well could have or should have been picked up earlier. And we think we are doing, a good job. But again, I think we just need to do a little bit more work prior to that as well.
Here's a question from Sarah, and it's to you, Donna. How do we help funders understand the need to invest resources into approaching our work in a more person-centred way and the additional time and investment this takes? Yeah,
it's a tricky one. I think, that certainly embedding an M&E culture, so you've got some evidence to be able to show the need is first and foremost. Also, I think the sector broadly has been, we've been having these conversations. So I think the funders and the sector broadly are very open to this, to understanding this. I think also, so when you're creating applications, I think that people want to hear and understand and want to support this. But I also think, I think you need to also internally do the work. So this is not this, I cannot tell you how big this, we thought this would be a small project, a relatively small project. This has changed ECLC, the whole way we do things, all the language we use, the way we approach everything. So I think the other thing I would say, aside from obviously the funder, is that you have to there's a bit of work to be done internally to be able to be in a place to be able to then do this work. We really underestimated that. So, yeah.
Here's one perhaps for you, Amy, if you'd like to have a go at this one. Rosie says she would love to see data on what happens to people who are turned away from services. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they become invisible to us once we have that last contact with them, and we don't actually know what that means for them and their ability to resolve their legal problem. And as Nigel shared on the data, most people are resolving it without legal assistance. And, you know, a thought that kind of popped into my head that we have to prioritise our funding based on some sort of framework, of which the priority client framework is. But what's the risk of turning away, that you then turn a client into a priority client and there was opportunities to resolve that legal problem earlier, and then there wasn't a clustering of legal problems that brought them into the framework. So I think that's something that we really need to grapple with. The team that I work with is interested about client journeys, and when we have service data that is still very much provider centric, we don't understand what a client's journey is through the legal system if they're having contacts with different service providers along the way. And where we'd be interested in doing some work on that to understand more from a client-centred perspective how their journey looks and what interventions we could have provided earlier or differently to improve that trajectory and the outcomes for them.
It's a tough data question, really. So, you know, I mean, you're going to either need the best admin data system in the world, or you're going to have to use some other methods to try and capture these journeys, but it's a really tough one. Just going back to the referral idea, though, I mean, we've known for a long time, I think I was writing about it back in 2004, that, you know, referrals are bad, and multiple referrals are really bad. But yeah, I mean, to date, the only method of trying to capture that effectively has been legal needs surveys. I think there's other ways of doing it, but it's going to need a lot of effort methodologically and, you know, a good data infrastructure to do that. It would be worthwhile.
And leading on from that, a question from Katie Keys to say, I'm interested in understanding how client experiences are being captured in order to measure impact. Would you, Nigel or Hugh, like to speak to that? Yeah, Nigel?
I can.
No, Hugh? Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that's one of the issues we've just done a bit of research on and that we'll be reporting on shortly. The short answer is that people are doing it in multiple and varied ways. So in talking to people across the legal assistance sector, everyone's grappling with this question in a slightly different way. So they're using different approaches. But there's some really fantastic, innovative stuff that's happening in actually going and asking clients about it. So what we would otherwise refer to as follow-up studies, to actually go and ask clients what happened, or was the information we provided useful, or the assistance we provided useful, things like that. So harping on again what Nigel mentioned, we probably need particular methods to be able to answer some of these questions. And then we need other research methods to begin to compare what might be more effective services, or what we would refer to as what works studies.
Yeah, and just adding to that, on the methods issue, this is a bit of a pet subject of mine, but you can get a lot from asking clients what happened, but you can't necessarily use that to quantify impact. And just by way of demonstration, I've got a web page open over here, and this is a quotation. It says, "For me, the treatment had a significant effect," right? And it's from the School of Homeopathy. And, you know, there's 110, there's a meta-analysis in the Lancet of 110 papers saying homeopathy makes no difference, and yet here's a client testimony saying it had a significant effect. So we have to be careful about what we can conclude from different methods, including asking clients what difference things made.
And look, I've got one final question here. Actually, Hugh asked this one early on in the piece, but it's, are there any reflections on what sort of data that you would like that you don't have? So that's for either VLA or Donna. Who'd like to answer that one? So data that you'd like that you don't have.
Well, I think there's a couple of ways I could take it. I can certainly take it from the perspective of the data that I would love to have now, which is that we're hoping to have, which is the data around attempted client, or attempted, I shouldn't say client because they're not clients of the service, attempted people's attempted engagement with the legal assistance sector, which we've talked about broadly. So the number of times people might have tried to reach out to different services, I would love to have that. But just as an organisation, one of the things that we're really trying to adapt, which does unfortunately take a lot of money, is having data systems that capture the client journey from first contact to exiting, or, you know, exiting is not quite the right word, but do you know what I mean? So at the moment we have Class, but we're looking at some contact centre software that helps us to map some of that. But again, all of those data sets don't necessarily talk. There needs to be plugins, there needs to be all sorts of things. That data system might not talk to legal aids like it could. Our data system might not talk to another centre next, you know, in the next catchment, which would be great if all of those did.
Yeah, absolutely. Carmen, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, look, I think there's probably lots of gaps, and yeah, contact center technology is helping us to get a better handle on some of our trends. So that's we're still on that journey, but and when we get the next version of that and the new intake screen, it'll be another step up. So we'll know things like if people have contacted the contact center, you know, a lot, or, you know, so not even further into the system, but we don't even now have a good system for understanding if they rang 7 times that day or not. So you can appreciate that that's, you know, there's a wastage there in terms of, okay, that person's really in need, obviously, that's an indication of strong need, but it's not helpful that we don't even know that that's happening. So, so I think technology helps us out a lot. I mean, we're all hamstrung, Hugh, by the data systems we've inherited or that have been developed, that they're legacy systems. So Legal Aid has a long-term plan to upgrade that. So do other legal aid commissions around the country. We're trying to work more in collaboration with those other commissions now too, to both to be able to share information and to get more sophisticated systems that are not just about collecting numbers to sort of meet a kind of a particular target, but actually are much more meaningful and help us with our service design and delivery.
Thank you.
Claire, I might jump in and just make one more plug for some data that we're interested in, and I support Carmen and Donna's comments. I think the challenge that we have is seeing it as a system, not just the legal assistance sector. And so we really don't have the data at the kind of upstream end, whether it's new police, where they're located, courts coming online, child protection workers, that then trickle down and create increased demand for us in providing legal services, and how do we better respond for that? And so how do we get the governance right that covers across legal assistance providers, but equally other justice sector agencies, so that we're thinking about the system more fully is kind of a key wish that we would, wanting to work on.
Yeah, a more sort of holistic view of things. Yeah. Well, look, thank you so much, everybody. Would anyone like to make a final comment? No? Okay. Thank you to all the presenters. Thank you very much to all those who attended. It was a real pleasure to do this presentation, and we look forward to seeing you at the next research network meeting, which is being planned for September. We have recorded this session and we are planning to share it with people on some of the resources that you saw today, so look out for that. And thanks everyone, take care, and best of luck.